there are children that have severe emotional and behavioral problems due to abuse and neglect. Um, my son has never been abused or neglected. My son started experiencing significant anxiety and depressive symptoms before the age of 6, but they became more pronounced with behavioral disturbance by around the age of 6 going on 7. And so the first thing I thought was, oh my God, has someone abused my child? Has someone touched my child and I don't know about it? Because his behavior changed drastically over the course of a few months. And so I would ask him, has anybody touched you in your private places that you haven't told us about? Has anybody done something to you? And he's like, no, nobody's done anything to me. And so that for me was a huge realization, because most of the children that I had worked with, many of them, if they would have had a supportive, stable environment, they wouldn't have had the extensive behavioral and emotional problems that they did. Some of them would have, because some of them did have some neurological issues, but most of them would not have. But my child was exhibiting a lot of the same behaviors as children who had been severely abused had exhibited. And so I knew, because he had not been abused and he was treated well at home, that it was truly, endogenous. Like the wiring of his brain is different. And, he was banging his head as an infant to self-soothe ever since he was about, as soon as he could lift his head, like 8 or 9 months old, 8 or 9 months, he was in his crib banging his head to self-soothe. And those are just hard wiring differences between his brain and, say, somebody else who's more, as you would call, neurotypical. So I think people need to realize that there are people that are born with significantly different neurobiological underpinnings, and they are going to behave differently regardless of how supportive and protective and loving their environment might be, because we are constantly telling Alex that we love him, we value him, that we are here for him. And when he's not doing well, he's paranoid, and he'll tell us things like, you're just pretending to love me. Are you really my parents? How do I know that you're really my parents? Was I adopted? He'll ask me things like, I'm sure many people have seen the movie The Truman Show. He'll ask things like, well, is it possible to be in a reality show but just not know it? And I said, Alex, that's really interesting that you would ask that, because there was a movie about that called The Truman Show. And so there's this, regardless of how much of a supportive and stable holding environment, if you want to look at from an object relations point of view, we've given him, there's still this level of uncertainty that Alex experiences, and this level of anxiety and sometimes paranoia, that thankfully the medication helps. When he is medicated and he's stable, he is the kindest and nicest and most empathetic and generous person in the world. When he is not medicated properly, he is angry, he's paranoid, and he's aggressive, and he will put holes through the walls, and he will um, say things that I wouldn't even repeat. It doesn't come necessarily from the home. Yes, there can be obviously circumstances where the family is abusive and neglectful, and the child suffers and has behavioral and emotional problems. But there are so many other instances where the child is well taken care of and becomes ill regardless. So historically, Alex has had many resources because we are considered to be like upper middle class and have health insurance. For many years, I worked for the federal government, and I had Blue Cross Blue Shield, which was excellent insurance. And we still have decent insurance through my current employer. It's like an Aetna plan, it's a PPO. So historically, the first resource we received was actually through the state of Virginia, called the Infant Toddler Connection, which is where Alex received his first 6 months of speech therapy. That was at no charge to us because it's a state funded program. He met criteria for it based upon evaluation from the Infant Toddler Connection. From there, he was evaluated for Child Find, which is another, it's a school, it's more of a preschool aged program through, again, Fairfax County, I believe. And he was not found eligible because he was too high functioning, according to their testing. However, they did say that he had significant occupational therapy needs. So what I did was, in addition to him going to his preschool, which was several days a week, he was doing occupational therapy with private insurance for 2 years, once a week, from the ages of 4 through 6. He was in occupational therapy, and he was able to improve his fine and gross motor skills. It also helped with some of the stimuli seeking behaviors. And so he was able to grasp a pencil properly. He was able to cut more easily with scissors. He was able to, be more successful in an academic school setting with those resources. He also started seeing a psychiatrist already by the age of 7. The psychiatrist that we originally had was not, his specialty was not in pediatrics. Looking back, he was not a good fit for Alex, but we were desperate. What people don't realize is that there is a national shortage of pediatric psychiatrists. And so we basically were grasping at finding someone that could prescribe psychotropic medication and do just simple medication and symptom management that would take our insurance, because a psychiatrist could run you $300 a pop otherwise. And so we had this particular psychiatrist, and I had spoken to my own primary care nurse practitioner who works in the psych field part-time, and she had told me about another psychiatrist through Dominion Behavioral Health in Loudoun, where Alex has been going for several years. And this particular psychiatrist that he's been seeing is a specialist in pediatrics, but she's also board certified for adults. And she changed his medication regimen, and it was like a 180 for him, because he was actually getting the medication regimen that he needed. He was on Zoloft, but he wasn't on a high enough dose for his anxiety with the old psychiatrist. And then she had added guanfacine, which is actually a medication used for hypertension, but for children with hyperactivity and difficulty focusing, it actually helps them to focus, and it reduces psychomotor agitation. And it also reduces aggressive behavior. So he really made significant improvement with that resource. He also, I had mentioned, started seeing a developmental pediatrician when he was 3 years old. There are so few developmental pediatricians that people will often wait a year to go to a place in Maryland and Baltimore, actually, to see one. We were very lucky. I was frantically calling many different locations, and Children's National Medical has, the few that are available in DC, and then there's a few in Maryland, like I mentioned, in Baltimore through I think it's through an extension of Johns Hopkins. But then there is also a Virginia division of Children's National Medical, and I was able to find Alex a Hopkins trained developmental pediatrician who actually takes insurance, who actually spends 2 hours with him every time she sees him. And she has been a source of light and hope in Alex's journey, thankfully. And she is probably one of maybe 2 or 3 available in the state of the Northern Virginia area. He sees her every 6 months. And when I do make appointments, I have to call quickly to make sure I get the next appointment, because her calendar will be booked up a year in advance, because the resources are that slim. So we need to have more developmental pediatricians. We need to have more pediatric psychiatrists. We need to have more psychotherapists that are willing to take insurance. There are a lot of therapists in the community, like myself, that will only do private pay. They will not take insurance because, unfortunately, managed care is cumbersome to deal with. And they don't want to have to turn in the paperwork to get reimbursed. And the reimbursement can take a couple weeks. Blue Cross Blue Shield reimbursement usually takes a week to 10 days, but others could take a month. So people rather just do private pay. And for many people, that's not feasible. So for someone like me, sure, I could pay $120 a session. I could get by, but most people can't do that. And so that's another thing I think the public needs to know about parents with special needs, that the resources, especially for mental health and developmental supports, are very slim. And a lot of times parents don't send their child, and so they're untreated. So there are a couple things that I did not mention that I think are noteworthy for
Mhm.
mentioning. So when you have a child with special needs, it has a significant impact on the entire family unit. And from like from a family systems or family theory perspective, when one person's ill in some way, everyone becomes ill in some way. And so like I mentioned earlier, my own mental health has become more pronounced. My own depression and anxiety issues have become more pronounced with my son's issues. But my daughter, who does not have significant problems, has also shown signs of regression because of the stress that it's placed on the home. So when you have one child who's screaming, kicking doors, making threats to harm himself, everyone becomes on eggshells. And so there's a sense of living in a landmine in many ways. And with a pandemic like we're having currently, it adds a layer of feeling almost like when your child is not doing well, you can love your child like I love my son Alex more than anything. But there's this sense of feeling sometimes as when he's been doing poorly, like I'm a hostage in my own home because you can't leave the house during a pandemic. And if your child is screaming and doing things that are disrupting the household, you feel like there's no place you can go. And so that has been a stressor. I'm very lucky because I have a strong marriage. My husband is a very supportive, loving man. But both of us have been under duress at times because of the dynamics that have taken hold of Alex. And so that I wanted to put out there, that it has a ripple effect on the family unit. And um, I often would talk about this in my veteran relationship group that I ran for many years. I always told people a family is like chimes or a mobile that you put over a crib. When one piece moves, the rest move. When one person in a family changes or is not doing well, everybody is forced to change and move in some way. And so that's something that I think is important to mention